Do you enjoy the idea of taking your favorite characters from comic books, anime, games, manga, and bringing them together, joining them in harmony to create something beautiful and interesting in a gaming situation? Well, if you do, then you've come to the right place, my friend. Welcome to The Cross Zone. Hello there, everyone. This is Andre, the Game Idea Guy. Welcome to episode number 14 of The Cross Zone Unraided. So this is going to be an idea that combines the worlds of Tomb Raider and Uncharted. Obviously, that hints towards the name. And we're going to be including the characters of those franchises. Obviously, the titular characters, being Lara Croft, who is the original queen of 3D exploration, and Nathan Drake, who is basically the video game equivalent to Indiana Jones that was also slightly inspired by Lara. So, just to give a basic rundown, Uncharted and Tomb Raider have both redefined 3D adventure games, defined and redefined 3D adventure games in their own way. With Tomb Raider, you gotta focus on exploration, puzzle solving, acrobatics, and things of that nature for traversing and understanding levels and getting depth and stuff like that out of them. Whereas Uncharted more so focused on the nature of gunslinging, action type scenes, and a lot of narrative and story driven things. Not to say that Tomb Raider, even in its original form, didn't have those things, but Uncharted put more of a focus on that side of it. Now, if we're going to be honest, both of these characters are pretty much capable of a lot of the same things, maybe not exactly. There are definitely some differences between the two, and I will do what I can to highlight that here. But it would be very naive to just assume that they wouldn't potentially run across each other if we had a world that they were both in. I think it would be very, very likely that you would see a Drake and Lara crossover at some point if they did inhabit the same world. Now, obviously, we wouldn't be using old school Lara, we'd be using the more recent version of her as part of the Tomb Raider reboot trilogy. But still, in either situation, you just wouldn't have a world where Nathan Drake and Lara Croft inhabit it and they haven't, one, heard of each other, or two, run into each other at some point. They're both treasure hunters, they both dig and root through ruins and such. It just makes a lot of sense that the two of them would eventually come across each other, even if the planet is very big, because they would likely be aiming towards the same artifacts at some point. And this idea would more or less be I guess you'd say, their first time running into each other, if we were to assume all things were equal and they were in the same world. And obviously this would be something that would be exclusive to PlayStation, because Nathan Drake belongs to Sony, whereas Lara Croft does not. I don't think she currently does have a home, unfortunately. I don't know who bought out the Square Enix stuff, but that's beside the point here. So, this is obviously going to be a more story-driven crossover, where Lara's and Drake's worlds have come crashing into each other, almost literally. Lara and Drake are each hunting for an artifact in the Amazonian jungle, each of them having found the same coordinates, and have their own sort of plan of attack for getting said artifact. Meaning that they both while they do both hit the same location, they're going to be coming in from different angles. They're not going to be doing this the exact same way as each other, because again, there will be some differences between the characters. And we know that they're both well-renowned treasure hunters and such. They just have their own methods of doing things. So there will, for the most part, be a lot of gameplay similarities between the two of them. Um, whereas there will be some very astute differences or very easy to see differences, like for the fact that Laura would likely be far more athletic, well, not athletic, but acrobatic than Nathan Drake. Because I could see Laura doing more like gymnastics type things that Drake just would not be able to do. Not because he's incapable of learning, he's just not trained in that direction. But whereas she would be more nimble, I would say that Drake would be more sturdy. He'd be able to take more hits, have more defense, and be physically stronger, and that could play its role in certain situations as well. Meaning each character, if they came upon the same puzzle, would have to tackle that puzzle in a different way. And I think that that makes for interesting gameplay dynamics, especially if we move a little bit further along to what I would really like to do, and that is have a 2 playthrough system, like old school Resident Evil. I think the more recent version did it as well, but I harken back to classic RE2 because of how the 2 playthroughs intermingled with each other. Because everybody knows the basic playthrough is the playthrough of Leon and then Claire, but if you did it in reverse, it changed some things and how you had to tackle certain things as each character. Because there are certain switches and things that can't be pressed or opened if you go with Claire first, and vice versa for Leon. So I think that having that be a thing as part of this system would be awesome. So you could, as a player or as a fan of either of them, start out with Drake and play through his game and do certain things that will affect your playthrough with Laura later. It's something I just think that makes a lot of sense, because I would have the characters. You know what, hold on, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Let me back up a little bit, because I still got to get down into the story, and I can intermingle some of the gameplay stuff in there. So, for the scenario that I have in mind, you'd have Laura and Drake hunting for a stone tablet that is said to be able to communicate with the souls of the dead and give the user their knowledge. For Drake, the interest in this tablet is to quell some rumors that have been floating about his family. And if he has that knowledge, he can put those rumors to rest, as well as the ability to make, a decent amount of money for himself. Now, Laura's end on this is that her family has ties to this mercenary group that she didn't know of. Her father had ties to them. And she's learned that this group is trying to find this artifact in order to be able to basically hunt through different archaeological sites to retrieve or steal treasures and make themselves wealthy and become the most well-known group of gunmen on the planet. And her ties to them through her family because of her father is something she's trying to investigate while she's trying to prevent them from getting this tablet. So, with Laura and Drake arriving after the Mercs have, and knowing that the temple is surrounded and covered and very well guarded by them, they have to sneak and fight their way through. Now, eventually, they'll get to where they believe they have found the main chamber with what looks to be the tablet artifact in a very unguarded state, which for Laura makes her question things and wonder, why is this unguarded? Whereas Drake is a little bit more gung-ho and he's just ready to grab it and roll the hell out. But they run into each other and they think that the other is part of the Merc group that they're they have been contending with. So sort of like thinking that they're the lieutenant. So they do have a little bit of a brief skirmish between the two of them. And when they figure that they can't just, beat the other person and then claim the artifact, they both run after it, only for the floor to give out underneath them and drop them on two differing paths inside these temple ruins. So this is where the gameplay aspect that I was talking about would come into play, because there will be certain things on either path that allude to the other person having been there. So basically playthrough A with Nathan or Laura would affect playthrough B with Laura or Nathan. So Nathan A affects Laura B, and Laura A affects Nathan B. Whoever you pick first is actually the first to make it through their pathway, and that is how the story would be dictated. So there are some instances where things that they do on their path would overlap with the path of the second playthrough, where there would be certain things that unlock that would be available to Nathan or Laura on the second playthrough that wouldn't be available on their first if you triggered the right events. Now, if you don't trigger said event, then the items don't become available, or these particular scenes that could be led to don't show up. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It would be cool. Plus, if you're playing as the second character, you could find like little notes that may have been dropped that allude to Laura or Nathan having been through an area because of the mercs talking about it. So if you're playing as Nathan on his second playthrough, you find little notes from the mercs talking about how Laura uses archery and bows and stuff and has been attacking them from shadows, and they didn't know she was there, but they figured out who it was. And with Nathan being played first and you're doing the playthrough with Laura behind him, you see like little notes in them talking about how Nathan likes to blow things up, and how he pushed a boulder over top of a group of them while they were in their camp, stuff like that, because I think that would be highly interesting, pretty cool to do. So I'd want the game to have, obviously I prefer the Tomb Raider reboot play style, but it's not too different from Uncharted. Though I do think that both controller styles should be available to whoever's playing. So if you're more of an Uncharted fan, then you should be able to have that play style for yourself. If you're more of a Tomb Raider fan, you should have that play style available. But like I said, the differentiating things between the two characters is Laura's more acrobatic, so she can reach higher places that Nathan can't because of her parkouring skills that he would not have. Now, whereas Nathan would have a good deal of physical strength that Laura doesn't, and be able to access places that would require it that she can't. Which would allow for certain items to be found and certain things to be unlocked. I would want this game to have the camp-based system from the reboot Tomb Raider games, and the mini dungeon, aka side quest system that has, because I think that would just add to it. Plus, you can unlock a lot of things that way, make the game a lot more fun, a lot more interesting for people, and it could bring about little Easter eggs if that happens. Like certain things could be unlocked, like having low poly Laura be unlocked, the old school version of Laura, and you could have the enemies and Drake even make comments about how she looks, or how she looks different, with them not being able to really put their hands on it, or saying alluding something to the lines of you look very sharp there, something like that, because of polygons being pointy and stuff like that, and having very sharp edges, which makes a whole lot of sense to me. Also, and I forgot to mention this, Laura and Drake do eventually meet up during your playthrough and work together once they come to the conclusion that they're both working against the same group, and also for potentially similar goals. Nathan's being a little bit more selfish, as that lends to his personality from what I have seen. And Laura's being a little more altruistic on the surface, because there may be some deeper things going on with her trying to discover what her ties to this mercenary group are. I think that, again, a lot of that makes sense, and it would be something that you could see the two of them working together. Now, I don't want to conclude a story here, but they would ultimately end up working together, and you'd have a buddy cop system working between the two of them at some point. Hopefully, whoever develops this game could work the AI reasonably so that it's not horrible like Resident Evil 5 or The Last of Us. I'm not confident in that, but I would hope that they would be able to. That all said, I think that this would be cool to do, and I honestly, oh man, I was about to skip over one major thing, and I'm glad I looked at my notes here. Crafting system. Like I said, the camp system would operate like it does in Tomb Raider Reboot Trilogy, which obviously you can camp, which means you can restore your health. You can also go to camp and craft items. I completely was about to forget to even mention that, and that would have been horrible for me, because I'm trying to combine these games and I want to combine the right elements. But yeah, the crafting system would be available, and for the most part, there would be a lot of stuff that both Laura and Nathan can craft in general. I would have it set so that there are some specific things that the two of them craft because they're just more in line with their personalities. And those things could even have the same parts as each other. It's just that Nathan would think to use those parts one way and Laura would think to use those parts another way. Just to show that there's differentiation between their personalities and how they operate. I mean, it should be obvious to most people, but if somebody's new to both of them, then you would want to show that, hey, Nathan's not just a male Laura, or Laura's not just a female Nathan. You want them to be seen as separate and individual characters with their own strengths and weaknesses that everybody can kind of get behind and may have a preference for. So, with all of that covered and thought about, because I could dive into creating the whole story, and I would really like to, but that would make this an extremely long discussion, and I don't think that would really work for a lot of people. So I definitely have to cut that down. But this does feel a little bit shorter than most of my other ones in the series. That said, I do want to end with just a few questions, just some stuff to think about if you're a member of the audience. Now, what would you guys like to see for this crossover? Like, as far as like the comedic stuff or storylines between the characters, or even maybe like Easter eggs that could come from other games they have been in. And how do you think that Laura and Drake will interact? That's kind of part of the last question, but still. And do you think this game would be a successful combination? Like, maybe Sony won't push to have the price drop within 6 months. I would hope they will. And do you think that this could become a franchise if it were to do well? Now, with all of that out the way and asked, I'm going to wrap this up. Because, again, I don't want to drag this off into being a 50-minute discussion by myself. This could become a Game Idea Foundry talk discussion. I think maybe it would be a good one to go with, and then I could expand upon it with some other people, and we could come up with some different ideas that may be fun and interesting for it. So I don't know, if anybody asks me, I may consider that. But thank you guys very much for listening in. Keep your eyes and ears out for more stuff from me. And until the next time, please enjoy your games. Peace out, everybody.